put them to Elizabeth to answer. The session is being recorded, so it is available for which we will circulate a link to it following the session, together with a copy of the presentation for you all. So at that point, I'll just hand you over to Elizabeth, who will be delivering the session today. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Just to say that as the slides will be sent to you, I've got my email address on there, so as if you have any queries afterwards, don't be afraid to ask me. As far as this session is concerned, I hope that you will learn the real need for trustees and for a balanced board, the consequence of different recruitment methods, and some basic training that's needed for trustees and their development. And I've also included, wherever possible, my references and some useful contacts for you. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, I haven't started the screen. I will just share my screen now, Elizabeth. Bear with me.
Slide 3, the need for trustees committee members. Okay.
Yeah, hold on one second. Let me just get there. You should be able to see my screen now. Can someone give me a thumbs? Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Third slide.
With me, yeah. Come on.
That's it. Thank you very much. Now, some of you will be familiar with a registered charity which has trustees. In other forms, if you're not a registered charity, you might refer to people as committee members. They might be called board members. If you're a social enterprise or a limited liability company, you might refer to people as directors. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to call people trustees. And if you are a registered charity, then it is a Charity Commission requirement that you have trustees who take certain responsibilities. And if you are a limited liability company, then you also have to abide by company law. And again, you need directors and you may call them trustees. Trustees are also very important for good governance and strategic thinking. Although when you hear about some of the activities of some charities, you just wonder whether they understand the word governance at all. Financial sustainability, and in this current climate, I think that's the one thing that's becoming harder and harder to ensure. I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. And it's about future-proofing the organisation. Does your organisation have succession planning? Is it flexible to meet the challenges? If you could think back to almost a year ago, who would have thought of COVID coming and the impact that it's had and the length of time that it's had an impact, where we've all had to change quite radically. It's about meeting your charity's core aims, and that's very important because very often people see needs and they're on the front line and think, oh yeah, we can do that, we can do that, we can do that. It's the responsibility of the trustees to make sure that your charity focuses on its core aims. And if there are development opportunities, to take them in on a staged level. And finally, it's very important that trustees are there for supporting the management and staff. And certainly over the last 2 years, I think there's been so much change coming from the Charity Commission that is, you think of the Data Protection Act, safeguarding and equality measures, then it's the responsibility of the trustees to almost protect the staff and volunteers and to be able to feed the changes into the organisation. Next slide, please. This is how I summarise the trustees' responsibility: nose in and hands out. In other words, ask questions, ask questions, ask questions, find out, challenge, but keep your hands out. Now, I'm quite aware that very often with very small charities or with charities that are very new, it's the trustees who may be involved in the setting up of the organisation, and they do the hands-on. They meet clients, they make the tea, they organise meetings and so on. But as that charity or that organisation grows, and becomes the need to define the role of the trustee not being involved in management, that can also create problems. And very often I've seen organisations where trustees were the founders of the organisation. It's their baby, they're protecting it, developing it. And as the organisation grows and other trustees come in, then some of the earlier trustees sort of behave like teenagers, if you like. They become surly and they become jealous of the involvement with their baby. And that's a stage of charity development which has to be managed very carefully. But on the whole, it's nose in and hands out. If it's not, if the trustee does have both responsibilities, it's really important that they know which hat they're wearing when they're going about their business. Next slide, please. The charity experience, it may or may not be of a comfort to you to learn that 74% of charities in England and Wales find it difficult to recruit trustees. Finding trustees to take on financial responsibility is the most difficult. And I don't know what it is about accountants or the organisations of accountants, but they don't seem to be very forthcoming in taking on charity responsibilities. Finding the people to take on the role of chair is difficult. And finding people to take on the role of safeguarding is a challenge. So you're not alone if you are finding difficulty in recruiting trustees generally or trustees for specific purposes. And that data and the following data all comes from a piece of research done by an organisation called gettingonboard.org. And they have a lot of very useful information on how to recruit trustees, and they operate as a sort of marriage bureau where you can sign up with them if you want to be a trustee and are not sure which organisation to join, or if you're an organisation looking for trustees. Next slide, please. I think that it's very easy to think, oh, we want trustees, we want people to volunteer, we want people to give their skills and talents to us. But trustees get a lot out of it as well. And in the piece of research by Getting On Board, they found that 96% of trustees felt that they learned a new skill. And I think that's very useful because very often people have got a background in a particular area, but when you're a trustee, you no longer have the sort of tight view. You have more of a giraffe's eye view on finance, on operation, on personnel, on marketing and everything. So people learn new skills. 86% found that it complements their professional, community and family life. And by this, very often people will join charities or organisations because it is linked to their family life or the community. For example, people very often will become a school governor when their children are in school. People may join a charity if it relates to the particular community that they're involved in. So it's a sort of complement and extension of their everyday life. 84% felt that doing good in this way made them happier. And I think we very often forget this, that the privilege of being able to do good does give you a sense of satisfaction and a sense that you are actually doing something to make a difference. And that's important. And I always feel that when I get a bit down, And then I think of some of the clients that Citizens Advice deals with, then I realise that actually, when it comes to it, I've got no problems whatsoever. There's always somebody who's worse off than yourself. 73% felt that the experience of being a trustee boosted their confidence. And I think that this is, again, is really important, that if you come on board as a trustee, hopefully your board is a supportive environment where people can learn to find their voice. People may not have had any trustee experience before they join you, but if you support them well and help them with their development, they can find new confidence of speaking in public, arguing in public, or debating rather, and it can be very much a help to them. 38% develop new leadership aspirations as a consequence. In other words, people who are working as well as being trustees, very often it boosted their confidence, they learned new skills, and as a consequence, they had higher aspirations for their own career development. And 22% achieved promotion as a result of being a trustee. And I think this is really important in that trustees are not all retired people, but very often they're working people. And the fact that you can take that experience means that that can impact on your own work progression and career. So you can get something out of it, and it looks good on your CV, so to speak. Next slide, please. So what's missing from charity boards? Young people. The average age of trustees is 57. And if you look at the sort of picture of trustee boards, you'll see a lot of grey hairs around the place. Amazingly, less than 0.5% of trustees are aged between 18 to 24. And when you think of the number of charities that deal with young people, I think this is quite a frightening figure. And young people do have a voice, and they do have information and can make a really good contribution. 2/3 of charity trustees are over 50. And there's also a tendency towards sort of middle class men and women. So there's a sort of age, if you have a board which comprises of all people over 50, then you're not really got experience of a lot of other areas. 2/3 of trustees still are men. 80% of chairs, and this is related to England and Wales, are men. So there's still room for more women on boards. Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, 6% of trustees come from these backgrounds, and mostly they are clustered in specific charities that deal with those issues, or religious charities and so on. And then disabled, lesbian, gay, bi and trans and other minorities is less than 1% in general. And it is surprisingly low, often in specific charities. You know, how you can have a charity that's maybe main focus is looking at people with disabilities, and you don't have people with disabilities on your board. You know, to me, it stands to reason that you need to cast as wide a net as possible to make sure you're really serving the people that are your clients. Next slide, please. The consequences of very narrow boards, very narrow makeup, older male people, is that a horrific 86% of charities are not equipped to meet the compliance, strategic and development needs for the next 3 years. And I just want to pause here for you to take a minute to think, is your charity equipped for the future? And we have a poll, which I hope is working, just to say yes or no. So if you could do that now, is your charity equipped for the future? Okay, while we collate that, I'll move on to some of the challenges for the next 3 years. We're all grasping with the post-COVID. It may need restructuring, it may need new technology, and it certainly will need funding. That's interesting. We're better than average down here. 50%, exactly 50% of people are equipped for the future, and 50% aren't. And I think that we're beating the national and binational average down here in West Wales, which is great. Moving on to the next slide then, please. Yeah, restructuring, technology, funding, all of these in the post-COVID coming into the new normal are things which are challenging us at the moment. Post-Brexit, I'm sure some of you have already come up against the changes to funding through public authorities. The money that was coming into Wales from Brussels is now going straight into London, and the amount that is going to be coming into Wales is certainly a challenge at the moment. At the moment, we have a low economy. Very low interest rates mean that grants, people who give grants are earning less from their money and have less money therefore to give out. And there's far more competition. There are more charities applying for funding than ever before. And those of you who may or may not know, the Charity Commission actually changed a part of it in December 2020. And we now have, it's no longer equality and diversity, it's equality, diversity and inclusion, EDI. And in future, all funding applications, tenders, local government funding, Charity Commission reporting and legal reporting, registered charities will need to prove how equality, diversity and inclusion is embedded in their organisation through its culture, through its policies and practices. It's no longer acceptable to just say, oh yes, we're concerned with equality and diversity. We don't turn anybody away, we treat everybody the same. And that's quite a sort of responsive a response to it. But now you have to be more proactive. If, for example, you want young people on your board, for example, in terms of inclusion, there is no point in advertising in newspapers which only old people read. You know, you have to be proactive that you are going to the places where people are, so that they can read your advertisements and can be part of your organisation. The Welsh language, as we all know, is crucial, and that we need to be able to show how we are providing our services in not just in English, but in the Welsh language also. So those are some of the current challenges which people are facing, and I'm sure there'll be more cropping up in the next few years. Next, please. Thank you. there are certain fundamental skills within a board. Not every trustee needs to have every single skill set, but obviously there needs to be somebody who understands compliance, governance, and we all are concerned with governance and ethics. Financial oversight, this is critical, that there is somebody on board who actually understands charity financial management, can read a balance sheet, understand the reserves policy, know exactly what sort of financial management figures you need every month, every quarter, or whatever. It's fun. At the end of the day, you're not just running a charitable organization, but you're running a business. You have HR requirements, you have financial requirements, staffing requirements, volunteer requirements. So it's important that there are people who can bring that together to develop some sort of business strategy, and to understand risk management. If you don't understand the risks that you're taking and the impact that that can have on your organization and its future funding, and then you could be in big trouble. And safeguarding, we all have to be absolutely on top of safeguarding issues, and I feel it's important to have a nominated trustee specifically responsible for safeguarding. You also need to understand the balance of your client's needs with the provision that your charity has. I know that, for example, in Citizens Advice, our client needs are always outstripping the facilities and the resources for the provision that we have. And we are constantly striving to be able to get more volunteers, more funding in order to meet the client needs. And I'd just like to say in there, it's not just your clients and meeting their needs, but it's the clients who haven't found you yet. Those out there who have the needs, but somehow or other, either they haven't found you or you haven't found them. It's those sort of missing clients that are really important. And again, as I mentioned before, equality, diversity, and inclusion is something that is critical. And I do urge you to look at the changes on the Charity Commission website. And there is a WCBA section there, which I've put, which will help you with embedding your equality, diversity, inclusion into your organization. Next slide, please. The specific skills within a board. Running a business is really useful if people have had that. Managing finance, managing people, managing resources, managing property. Any or all of those may be important to your organization and they need managing. It's really important that you have people on your board who really understand client needs and their changing needs. Understanding the environment in which the charity is operating. If we are looking for any funding from Welsh Government, and indeed a lot of independent trusts, there is a big move towards working with others, partnering. So, if you're working in that sort of environment, then you need to be making sure that you are identifying clear partners to work with. And that leads on to funding, bidding, tendering. It's becoming far more professional now. It's no longer enough to say, well, we're a nice organization, we're a very good organization, and if you give us the money, we'll spend it well. Those days have gone. It's about identifying who you will be serving, how many people you will be serving, how much it's going to cost, and so on. And I would like to make a plea at this point. So many funders now are not really accepting the full cost of what they're asking charities to do, particularly if those charities have volunteers. So when you're doing your funding bids, you really need to make sure that you cover management costs, that you cover any redundancies that are possible at the end of the new at the end of the program. Technology. I'm sure all of you have got to the point where you're zoomed out or zoomed in or whichever. The changes in our use of technology in this past year has been phenomenal, but the changes there will be more changes to come, whether it's for internal communications or for external use. Technology is with us and will be, I believe, taking an even more important role. Reaching different stakeholders and communications. I think that's so important that as a board, you have people with contacts. Specific knowledge of geographical areas or communities. I mean, it's really important that you have people who understand what drives people's needs in your area. So it may be that you need people from isolated rural communities to understand their lives and the issues that affect them. It may be that you need knowledge of people who work in the tourist and leisure business, which is very seasonal in many cases. So, you need not just specific skills and talents, but the people with experience in certain areas. And of course, we also need Welsh speaking and according to your charity, according to your organization, other language skills. And I put there, which I think would be useful for you to sort of think about, what skills and experience are missing in your own charity board. And I would like to just point out that it's not just the skills, but what transferable skills can you have? And I always say to, particularly to women who are looking to become a trustee, but feel that they haven't any negotiating or discussion skills. And I always say to them, if you've had a 2-year-old in a supermarket who wants a bar of chocolate and you don't want them to have it, if you can get out to that supermarket without a temper tantrum and without having to deal with screaming and so on, if you can negotiate that, you can negotiate in any boardroom in the world. Next slide, please. What are the consequences of an imbalance in your board? Well, it may be if somebody doesn't know what your requirements are, you may not be compliant. You may actually be operating illegally. It may be that you're not sustainable. You haven't got sufficient funding. It may be that you're not reaching the communities that you serve, or indeed that those hard to reach potential clients that I was mentioning before. It may be that you've got too much emphasis on one aspect of the business. I was on one board and I was the only non-accountant there. And I was forever sort of trying to say, there are other things in life apart from figures. The financial data was absolutely immaculate, but issues about supporting staff, issues about supporting the volunteers and so on were just going over a lot of heads. And I had to do an awful lot of work to make sure that we, A, recruited more trustees, and B, that we covered more than just finance. It's not enough. If we don't have enough business oversight, then we start making poor decisions. We can perhaps not meet our clients' needs, and we will have an impact on our reputation. So just as a note to yourself, it may be important for you to make a list of what's important for your charity. The next slide, please. recruitment is absolutely crucial. First of all, you need to identify what skills do you need, what equality and diversity and inclusion gaps do you need to fill? Do you actually have a recruitment pack? And what is the process for recruiting people? I know when I joined one organization, and the induction, which we'll come on to, comprised of me being given a very large A4 folder and told, that's your induction package, full stop. What is your mix of advertising, promotion? You know, are you going to use a recruitment agency, newspapers, social media? Word of mouth is the way that most trustees have found. The danger with that is we speak to people like us, and therefore we just perpetuate the same type of trustees on board. Do you use a recruitment platform or a local platform, or do you get some third party involved? Who are responsible for the various stages of the recruitment process, and how is it coordinated? Next slide, please. Recruitment practice. So often you can get somebody who is interested in becoming a trustee, but how do you actually get from that point of interest into an actual application? Shortlisting and interviewing. Who does it? How do they do it? When do they do it? I feel that it's really important that the chair plus one other trustee, and sometimes the chief executive, are involved in the interviewing process. And I also feel that it's important to have a set of basic questions which you ask people, and having read their application, to have specific questions that you may want to tease out with their specific issues. It's really important to take references, although it is difficult sometimes. I like the practice of asking for 3 references when you act on 2, because sometimes getting references can take so long that it actually can make the recruitment process so long that people lose interest. But it is important to get references, and dare I say it, beware of absolutely glowing references, because it could be not quite accurate. Getting new trustees on board, there are legal requirements in terms of registration and practical. And I'm sure you're all aware now that during the interviewing process, you now have to ask people whether or not they've ever been found guilty of any sexual offences. Depending on your organisation, then you might have to have other police references and so on. And the induction process. So many people pay scant attention to the induction process, but it is so important. I believe that it takes between 6 months to a year for any trustee to really feel comfortable within the organisation and to know what it's about. Next slide, please. Trustee recruitment. As I've briefly mentioned, word of mouth is by far the most often used. As I say, it's not always the best because it tends to recruit people like ourselves. Local advertising is very good, but you have to be aware that certain people read local newspapers and others don't. Posters can be a really good way, leaving them in GP surgeries, in libraries, local halls, local shops, and so on. Posters can be a good way, and of course, websites and digital media. It depends, again, what sort of people you're trying to recruit, because in the same way that not everybody reads local newspapers, not everybody looks on websites and digital media. I put in the list a number of marriage agencies who are the sort of agencies between people who are looking to be a trustee and organizations who are looking trustees. And these work very well. But one of the problems that I found in looking at them is that they tend to be very London centric. So that very often they've got a lot of people, but they're not actually within reasonable travelling distance of West Wales. It's also quite useful to contact specific organisations. Most organisations, accountancy groups, legal, personnel, chambers of commerce, chambers of trade, will have Rotary and so on, will have local meetings, and you can contact people and ask through them whether or not they have people who would be interested in being trustees. You can use a recruitment agency, but again, in my experience, they tend to be city based and not always understanding exactly what you want, and they can be very expensive. Next slide, please. I won't spend much time on this slide, but it's just a number of resources that are useful for recruiting trustees, and I've indicated those that are free, so that if you go onto those organisation websites, they can help you find trustees. Next. If you're looking for people, we've talked about specific skills, then, knocking on the door of large businesses. And again, it can be very useful to have people who are employed in large businesses. It's part of the business's involvement with the community. And of course, it can be part of the training and development for that person to be working as a trustee. Local networks, again, you can get people with specific skills in chambers of trade, chambers of commerce, Rotary, Soroptimists. And very often these organizations are also looking for people to come and speak at their weekly, monthly meetings, whatever it is. And it's a good way of promoting what your charity does. Professional associations. I've given you a list there of ones with accountants, treasurers, lawyers, and HR. Again, they tend to be city centered, but they can be useful for getting contacts. And then there's various publications, websites, and online networks. Next slide, please. I've just put this slide up. If you need help in actually identifying what skills you've got on your board and what you need, the organizations that I've listed here have got some really good skills audit tools that you can use. Most of them are free, and you can just download the questions and the queries and the processes, and maybe have an away day or a morning where you and your colleagues identify what skills you've got and what you need. And of course, your local CBCs, PABs, CABO and CABs, have skills audit tools which you can use as well. So next slide, please. Developing trustees. It's really important that trustees, when you're developing new trustees, that you give them the confidence and the enthusiasm to remain with you. And one of the ways of doing that is by having an absolutely clear and concise induction program. And this is absolutely critical. The Charity Commission website has a mine of information. in terms of developing trustees. What is the role of a trustee, and what are the specific roles of, say, the chair, the vice chair, treasurer, and so on. And I really would commend all of you to look at the 15 questions trustees should ask. If you just have one away day a year as an organisation, have an away day and focus on those 15 questions, if you can get through them in a day, that is. And when I said nose in, hands out, the nose in is about asking these 15 crucial questions about your organisation. It may be that your trustees need to go on specific training programs, understanding charity finance, safeguarding, managing volunteers, and so on. There are a lot of courses which can help you with that. And again, I do commend you to have some away days. You cannot work and develop individual trustees or develop the trustee team through just board meetings. You need the board to keep the board meetings focused on the business in hand. The team building and the development of trustees can be done in a separate case. It could be in the morning and you have a board meeting in the afternoon or whatever, but it is important to make sure that you have that space for people to be trained and developed. And as I say, there are a lot of excellent training courses through your CBCs, Welsh Council for Voluntary Organisations. Civil Society is another organisation you can find on the web, on the internet, and Good Governance. And of course, there's bespoke training, which PAVS, CAVO and CAVS have done. And I must admit, it's an excellent range of courses. I've attended a number of them. And they will develop bespoke training courses specifically for your organisation. So the next slide, please. The induction programme, it's really crucial. Induction is a journey, it's not an event. I've already mentioned who is responsible for what throughout the induction process. How confidential, how do people understand confidentiality and security of your organisation? Not just verbally, but digitally as well. You need to make sure that people know who the board, the management, the staff, the volunteers are. There's a whole load of issues around technical access, procedure, passwords, security, particularly if they're using home computers. Understanding the key aims and objectives of the charity. And it's not enough to just read the sheet of what the aims and the objectives are. It takes weeks, months to actually understand that and how we achieve them. What about the organizational architecture and the communications routes? How do the board operate? How do the board interact with management? What's the management structure? What about staff and volunteers? How are they organized? And it's so important to have an organizational calendar where you've got key meeting dates, key deadlines, key events. I always like to have a running 12-month calendar so that people have got those dates in their diary, and they've got no excuses. If it's booked up a year ahead, they've got no excuses for not turning up. And then there's places to visit, people to meet, key stakeholders, partners. It's getting to know the whole organisation and how it operates. And there's also the opportunity for mentoring. You may want to do internal mentoring, or you may want to invite somebody who's been a trustee for a long time in another organisation to mentor a new trustee. Next slide, please. I just thought I'd put this in because it's important. Sorry. When you start off as an organisation, you're forming. And then you move to the point of storming. You're getting to know each other, getting to know your strengths and weaknesses, understanding who keeps talking and who needs to be brought out in the discussions. And then you start norming, where you know who to trust on reading the finance, you know who doesn't understand personnel, and you're getting to know each other and starting to accept their strengths and weaknesses, and then you become a performing board. Once you've completed that circle, and it's not necessarily just going around completing the circle, but as soon as you put a new trustee into that, if they're a very strong character and a very strong beliefs, they can push the whole group back to that forming level. And you have to put the work in through the storming and getting to know each other again. And this is particularly important if you have 2 or 3 or even 4 new trustees that join your board at the same time. That can really push you into the storming side again, and then norming and performing. So it's really important to understand how new trustees can impact upon the performance of the board. Sometimes they're recruited specifically for the purpose. Sometimes it's a sort of side effect that you're not necessarily aware of. Next slide, please. So, are you a disparate group of trustees or are you a performing board? You need the time and space, as I said, outside of board meetings. You need to get to know each other. You need to know what experience they've got. What are their direct skills? Transferable skills are equally important. Strengths and weaknesses, learning together, and overall trust and respect. It's so important that you do trust or respect people and respect people. Next slide, please. So in England and Wales, there are just over 169,000 charities. And as of January 2021, surprisingly, there was an increase of 1,750. I say surprisingly, but a lot of it has been COVID driven. Overall in England and Wales, there are about 700,000 people involved as trustees. But when it comes down to it, that's around about 500,000 people, because so many people who are trustees will be trustees of not just one organisation, but maybe 2 or 3. So what I say to you is keep up the West Wales commitment. Being a trustee is really important. Being a trustee can be extremely satisfying. And I hope now we've got time for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was just so interesting. And anybody who knows any of the officers that work at TBCs, we're so fascinated by governance. That was really, but there was some key points in there I thought about and struck a chord with me. Nose in, hands out. The fact that the low level of women who are on the boards and other sort of service users or beneficiaries. And also the issues about induction, and certainly I deliver training, and the feedback when we're doing trustee training is that very few people actually receive a good induction process. Thank you for that. So we have got some time for the questions, and there have been some questions in the chat. We had one early on from Clive, who was asking a question about financial matters. And he was asking, I'm not sure if this is a question perhaps for the panel as well, not just for Elizabeth, about banking and online banking, and purchases being made when checks are not available. So yeah, my sort of response to that would probably be to change and review your bank account to make sure it's has an online service, like you can purchase those things you want to buy. Yeah, Elizabeth, is there anything?
It's quite possible to just open up a small bank account for expenses, and that you have a card, which of course has to be very carefully monitored in terms of who uses it and what for. But it's really important which bank you go to. For example, HSBC have been bought up by an American bank, and if you have any account, even if it's an account holding anything up to £500, every year you have to fill out about 100-page document of security and so on, all related to money laundering. And the effort of doing that is not worth it. So other banks have provision, if you like, for small accounts that are just used for expenses, and will give you a credit card, or a debit card rather.
Right. Clive, I hope that answers your question on that. We had another question from Philippa, who was asking about, we were talking about people who are receiving, who are beneficiaries of the charity, are they allowed to be trustees or on the committee of that charity?
It depends what the benefit is. If it's a case of somebody who is on a charity board and they own a company, and that company gets lots of business from the charity, then there are restrictions on the amount of the level of finance of that business, and it has to be declared. You've only got to read the newspapers about declarations of financial transactions.
I think she was referring to perhaps somebody with a disability to be on the board of a disability charity.
Yes, yeah. Where people are clients, then yes, they can be members of the charity, but in the same way that funders can. But if there is anything in the board meeting which could mean that they are conflicted, they have to declare that. And it's good practice at the beginning of every board meeting to ask if there are any members of the board have a conflict of interest in any of the items. And then the rest of the trustees will decide whether the conflict is such that that person goes outside and is not part of the discussion, whether they can be part of the discussion to give information but don't vote. So it's good governance to actually make sure that you have your trustees' register of interests always in front of you.
And certainly being a standing sort of item on the agenda about conflicts, it brings it to the fore all the time.
Yes, yes.
I'm just trying to look back at the questions. We had one from Wyn Llewellyn, who was asking about equality, diversity and inclusion, and about how you feel that criteria can be applied.
Right. A lot of people, when you mention the equality, diversity and inclusion, think about it in terms of race and colour, but it's not that. It's a much wider concern about, do you have a diverse board that reflects the communities that you serve? And as I said, that's about age and so on. And how you actually embed it in your organisation are things like, if you are recruiting, what media do you actually use? I'll give you an example with the COVID vaccinations. My GP practice put it on their social media website that people over a certain age could now come for vaccines. I don't go on their social media website. I've got grey hair. I don't do things like that. But that's an example where they weren't actually applying the strategy of equality, diversity and inclusion. If you were dealing with people in isolated rural areas, are you just putting information on posters in Haverfordwest, for example, or do you go out to community halls and organise events in those rural areas? So it's actually thinking about the people that are missing and how do you reach them. I think it's also important that I think we were mentioning the other day that, you see a number of different people from different ethnic backgrounds in West Wales, but there tends to be an overriding sort of thing that, oh, we don't have many people of different backgrounds here, but we do.
Yeah, it is.
The fact that they're a small number doesn't mean to say that they don't exist.
We've got another question here from Isabel, who is asking, when you are a small charity and still in the process of establishing it, is it a real no-no for the chair to perform the CEO element of management?
At the end of the day, you've got to go with what you've got. I mean, that's the practical concern. And if you are a small charity, then it may be that there isn't anybody else who's got the skills, the time, the commitment, etc., to do it. But what that person clearly has to do is to think, which hat am I wearing? Am I CEO today, or am I chair? And they have to clearly identify that to the trustees and management. As you know, I'm asking this question as the CEO. I'm doing this as a CEO. I'm asking this because I'm a trustee or I'm the chair. So it's preferable if it can be separate, but at the end of the day, you've got to go with what you've got. But you can put things in place which separate out the two roles.
Okay, careful management of that.
Yeah.
We've had another question in from Gail Morgan Williams, I think I might, and we are registered as a small charity within the last year. They've got a really good group of trustees now, and how any ideas on how best to prioritize all the things that need to be in place before when we're moving forward?
Right. How do you actually prioritize? I mean, first of all, there's things that you need to do in terms of compliance and being legal. If you're not operating legally, then you know everything is in jeopardy.
Yes, that's right.
That's your first thing. Second thing, are your finances in place? You know, if you can't, if you've got staff, you can't end up not being able to pay them. You know, that is important. If you've got rent, you've got to be able to pay your rent. And then the third thing is people. You know, have you got the right people? So I would say be legal, be financially cared, and then people.
Yeah, and then look at what you're doing, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know if my other panelists have been able to see any. We've got a couple more questions.
I'm mindful as well, Vanessa, that 15:31.
Oh, right, we've gone over.
We have gone over. So I think what would be useful is if we take the chat and pick up any of the questions that haven't been answered, and then we can answer them in the email that we send out.
That sounds like a really good plan. Cheska has just launched a poll with regards to the webinar. But first, if you could click on that, we'd appreciate your feedback. But I'm conscious of the time. So Elizabeth, I want to thank you very much for delivering the session for us. It's been really informative. Thank you everyone for attending. And as Jackie said, the presentation recording and any answers to the questions will be sent to you. Elizabeth mentioned in her presentation about the importance of digital, and that leads nicely on to tomorrow's session if you'd like to tune into that. It's on digital platforms to help your organisation, and we're looking at Info Engine, Funding Wales, the Connect platform and the Knowledge Hub, and that is taking place tomorrow afternoon. So thank you everybody very much for joining us. Thanks to the panel and thanks to Elizabeth for her talk. Thanks ever so much.
You're welcome, Val.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I'd be happy to answer any of the questions on the list if you want. Okay.
Oh, that would be lovely. Thanks, Elizabeth.
If we pick them up, if we save them in the chat, Cheska, then we can pick them up and then Elizabeth can have a copy and answer those. That'd be really great, won't it? Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah,
really informative.
Really good. See everybody else tomorrow. Same time, same place.
Same time, same place.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.